Hi everyone, it's Angela from Cake Angel, and in today's Bake Along I'm going to show you how to make a really easy German apple cake, which is also known as a Kuchen. And for this we're going to use our standard ingredients. These are all things that you should have around the house, and I'll talk you through the measurements for those as we start to add them to the mix. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to do is actually prepare our baking pan. I'm using an 8-inch cake pan here. And we're going to go ahead and line it with parchment paper. And the reason I like to do this is to stop the cake actually sticking to the pan, so that once it's baked it's really easy for us to remove it from the pan and we don't end up with the cake breaking apart on us. So I'm just taking my standard parchment paper, I'm going to grab a pen and I'm going to draw around the bottom of the cake pan just to give us our circle size. Now you can buy ready cut parchment circles for this purpose, but I find it's really quick and easy to do it myself. So as you can see, I'm just going ahead now. I'm going to cut out that circle. And I like to do this with any cake that I bake. I'll pop the link up at the top right now and you can see that I have other videos showing you how to line cake pans. Quite often I'll also line the sides of the tin as well, but this cake doesn't rise too much, so I'm not too worried about it, and we're just going to grease the sides of the pan instead. So now that that's cut, we're going to put that into the bottom of the cake pan, and I always use just a little bit of butter to do that, to attach it to the pan. For this recipe I'm using a plant-based butter as it's a dairy-free recipe, but you could use any butter for this. You could also use a cooking spray as well, whatever you have to hand. Make sure you give that a really good wipe around the sides as well. As I said, that's going to stop it sticking to the sides too. And then just press your parchment circle into the bottom of the pan. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and start making our cake batter. I'm going to be using a hand mixer for this as well. You could do this in a stand mixer, but I find because it comes together really quickly, I'm just going to use my hand mixer instead. So the first thing we're going to add to our bowl is our plant-based butter. I'm using 100 grams, and this is being sat in room temperature just so that it's nice and soft for us and it'll break up nice and easy. To that I'm adding 150 grams of granulated sugar. And then we're going to go ahead and cream them together with our hand mixer. You don't want to do this for too long, just until it becomes a little bit light and fluffy. But make sure that it's combined. The important thing is to make sure there's no actual bits of sugar left at the bottom of your bowl. And as you can see, it comes together really quickly. Now, if for any reason your butter isn't at room temperature when you decide you want to make this cake, you can always put it on a plate and just defrost it in the microwave. That will actually just start to take the edge off of the coldness and mean that you can actually beat it up a lot quicker because it'll be a little softer for you. I highly recommend that you don't try and make this cake with cold butter. The next thing we're going to do is add our liquid, so we're going to start with our 1 egg. And to that we're going to add our milk. Again, I'm using plant-based milk for this. This is my favourite one to use. It's an almond milk, which I find is quite similar to dairy milk when you use that in cakes, as it's quite creamy. And I'm adding half a cup of milk. And the final liquid that I'm going to add is some flavouring. Now I always like to add vanilla to my cakes. For this one I'm using a vanilla bean paste, and we're going to add a teaspoon of that. If you don't have vanilla bean paste, you can also use an emulsion, or you can just use a regular vanilla extract as well. And of course, if you wanted a different flavour, you could just straight substitute that again. And it's a teaspoon that we're using for this. Now I should have remembered at the start as well, make sure before you start this process that you preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. The mix comes together really quickly, so we want to make sure our oven is at the right temperature before we put the cake in. So I'm just mixing all those ingredients together to make sure they're nice and combined. Same as before, you just want to make sure there's no bits left at the bottom of your bowl. And the last thing we're going to do is add our dry ingredients. So I'm adding a teaspoon of baking powder and then 150 grams of all-purpose flour. And then we're going to go ahead and mix until that's combined as well. And there you go, that's our batter ready to go in the pan. Just going to clean off those whisks. And I just like to give it one final mix with a spatula to make sure it's picked up everything in the bottom of the bowl. So now we're just going to go ahead and scrape that down into our baking pan. This is a fairly thick mixture, so we'll need to actually spread it around in the pan ourselves. And I like to use a silicone spatula for that because it helps just to get everything smoothed out really nicely. And you can see to do that, I'm just using the spatula and turning the pan. And that's to help encourage the batter to actually go to the edges of the pan. We don't want to leave any empty space in this. And you want to try and flatten it off a bit as well because we're actually going to add some apples to the top of it. So you want to make sure you've got a nice base for that. And before we add our topping, I always like to give my cake pans a wrap on the counter just to start to remove any air bubbles. So now I'm just going to clean everything up and then we're going to start to work on our apples. I'm just using 2 regular apples for this, no particular variety. These are Red Delicious, but you can use any ones for this cake at all. I'm going to peel them and I'm going to core them as well because we want to cut them into really nice thin slices that will sit on top of the cake batter. So don't forget to let me know in the comments below if you've ever heard of this type of cake or if you've ever made it before. Essentially, it's just a really nice, light and moist vanilla cake, and you can add all sorts of flavorings to it. You could add spices to it, you could add nuts to it. This is really nice, I find, with apple though. So this recipe was actually recommended to me by a friend on my MBA course, so I wanted to have a try and see what it's like. But as I said, it's very similar to a standard vanilla cake recipe, and you can flavour it however you like. So that's our apples peeled. The next thing we're going to do is core them. And this will just help when we go ahead and slice them so that we don't have to deal with the middle of the apple. If you don't have a corer, you could just slice them at this stage and then cut the middle bit out. It really doesn't matter. So we're going for nice thin slices. And then once they're cut, we're going to arrange them on the top of the cake mix. So let's go ahead and get this part sped up. And now we're ready to add them to the top of the cake. So I'm just going to start from the outside and work our way around. And you'll notice I'm just lightly placing them on the top of the batter. You don't really need to push them into it at all because they're just going to sit there nicely as it starts to bake, and the cake will rise with it as well. Okay, there we go. We've got a few extras, which I'm sure the kids will eat once this goes in the oven. And that's it, it's ready to go. One last thing though, and this is the thing that I think really elevates this cake. If you want to do this stage, which I almost forgot, I highly recommend that you add some sugar on the top. This will give a really nice sort of texture to it, a little bit caramelly as well. I'm using regular sugar here, just a couple of teaspoons, but you could use brown sugar as well. And then we're going to add one last thing. So let's add some cinnamon to it, and that's going to give it that nice little bit of spice as well. Let's give it all a good shake. Oops, you can see a little bit too much came out there, but that's okay. So that's perfect, that's ready to go in our oven, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to bake this at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes. You want to start to check it around the 40-minute mark depending on your own oven, and when it comes out it should look like this, really nice and golden brown. You can see how it's risen quite evenly as well, a little bit higher in the middle, but this is perfect and it's nice and springy and almost ready to eat. Now you need to wait for this cake to cool down so that we can remove it from the pan as well. Otherwise they have more of a tendency to crumble if you remove them from the pan too early. So now that it's cooled down, we're ready to cut it. So I'm just going to carefully tip it over into my hand. And this is going to come out really easily because we lined and greased our tin as well. I'm going to peel off that parchment circle that we made right at the beginning and then just pop it on my Lazy Susan. And you can see this cake has a really nice height to it. It's the perfect size cake to have with a tea or a coffee for an afternoon treat or even for breakfast. So let's go ahead and slice the cake and take a look at it inside. You can see it cuts really nice and easy. It's a very moist cake. And it smells so good too. I wish you guys could smell how good this is. So you see we've got a really nice crumb in it. It's risen really nicely. Those apples have caramelized a little bit as well because we added the sugar to it. And of course it's got that cinnamon on top for that extra nice spice too. So there we go, there's our easy German apple cake. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this bake along. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'm going to pop my bake along playlist up here so you can take a look at the other things that I've made. Thanks so much for watching, have a great day.